Hello, and welcome to another sidebar, specifically another mic sidebar, because Cody is not here with me. Today, what we're doing is on the last sidebar, I ranked Metallica. I figured I would keep with the thrash metal train, and this time we'll be ranking Slayer, or at least Mike's views of Slayer ranked. If you've watched several Album Fight Club episodes at this point, or I should say, listened to several Album Fight Club episodes, you will know that Slayer is one of my favorite bands. I've told the story like 5 times at this point, so I'll just give the brief version. In college, Slayer overtook Metallica for my favorite of the big four. I just liked their heavier sound. I liked that all their albums sort of fit the vein of Slayer, where Metallica kind of had that middle period with Load and Reload where I just don't really care for it. So Slayer's one of my favorite bands. I'm actually wearing my favorite Slayer shirt, which for audio this is not playing, but for video it's this stained glass sort of Baphomet thing. It's very colorful, which is uncommon for a lot of Slayer stuff, but I think it's really cool. I should also mention that these sidebar episodes, or at least the ones I'm recording, are actually video recording too, because I'm showcasing the vinyl. We have a YouTube channel, if you didn't know. So if you're listening to this, you can also watch it on video on our Album Fight Club YouTube channel. Just type in Album Fight Club, and I'm sure you'll eventually come across it if you so want to watch the video of this. If not, you're listening to it, so that's fine as well. So, with the Metallica ranking, I do have all Metallica's studio albums on vinyl, and that's not really that exciting. Walmart kind of made it so that you can easily get all of Metallica's records with no problem for a decent, affordable price when it comes to vinyl. I don't know what Slayer's deal is, but they were really not keen on repressing a lot of their records. So I am very happy and very fortunate to actually have all of Slayer's vinyl, all of Slayer's records on vinyl. It costs a lot of money, which I don't really want to talk about how much it costs, but regardless, as a huge Slayer fan, it really is cool to have all their stuff on vinyl. So what I'm going to do is the same thing I did with Metallica, which is I'm just going to go from my least favorite to favorite in terms of the Slayer ranking and sort of give reasons as to why I believe the way I do. However, I will make it clear that I am not going to talk about a few of the Slayer records that synonymous. I do have them on vinyl, but for the sake of this, I'm not going to be talking about them in terms of the ranking. That includes Live Undead, which is one of their early records, one of their first live recording record. I'm not going to talk about this. It's just live recordings of various things off Haunting the Chapel and Show No Mercy. It's cool. It's a really cool timepiece of Slayer in their early days before people really were huge fans of them. But as far as ranking this thing, it doesn't really, I don't think it should really be ranked among the studio records, but I do have it on vinyl and it is pretty cool. It's also a Metal Blade pressing, or repressing, I should say, which Metal Blade was fortunate enough to basically repress a lot of the early Slayer records. And it's a cool blood splatter vinyl, which I like when vinyl is not just stark black. I think stark black vinyl is kind of annoying. I like when they do something interesting with it. So very cool record, but I'm not going to talk about it beyond that. Another very good record, in fact, one that is one of my favorite live recording records of all time, is Decade of Aggression. There's the age-old famous question of if you could go back in time and see any band at a certain period of their career, what would it be? For me, without question, it is Slayer post Seasons in the Abyss tour, so the Decade of Aggression era of Slayer live. Playing everything off their first 5 studio albums, playing stuff from Haunting the Chapel, this would have been unreal. I would give a lot of money to go back in time and see them during this era of their career. I can't, unfortunately. Slayer's gone. Jeff is dead. Dave has no intention of doing anything Slayer, and Slayer's retired, so that's never going to happen. But if I could pull it off, that would definitely be the era of Slayer I would go back and see. Again, just the peak of their craft, the peak of their musicianship, the peak of their capabilities as a band. Just unbelievable stuff. One of my favorite live records of all time. So as far as those live recordings, I have them on vinyl, but I'm not going to be ranking them. Other things that I have on vinyl that I'm not going to be ranking. Haunting the Chapel, which was an EP that they released after Show No Mercy. Again, one of their earliest recordings. Really great stuff on here, but it's not really enough for me to rank it among, I don't really see it as that. It does have Chemical Warfare on this thing, which is one of my favorite Slayer songs. Just a killer track. And a very early version of Aggressive Perfector, which reappears on the extended cut of Rain and Blood, which is very cool. I have it on vinyl. Very glad I have it on vinyl. not going to rank it. And finally, things that I will not rank, but I do have on vinyl is, man, I'm blank. Undisputed Attitude. I almost blanked on what this album was called. This is a cover. If you don't know, this is a covers album of a bunch of punk covers. Very strange, in my opinion, that Slayer would do this. A lot of people do rank this in the discography of Slayer, and a lot of people rank it very low, if not at the bottom. I can see why. It's very strange. It's fast, which is definitely Slayer, but for it to be punk covers, it's just kind of odd. I don't hate it. In fact, Gemini, the one actual studio Slayer song on here, I think is actually pretty cool, but it's not one I really press or revisit often. It's just kind of there. I don't really feel inclined to rank it among the studio albums because it's a bunch of live recordings, or excuse me, it's a bunch of covers. So for me, I don't really see it as having to be ranked among all the other stuff. But those are 4 that I have on vinyl. I'm not going to talk about them any more than that. But from here, I'm going to start actually talking about the studio albums and where I place them in terms of rank. And already I'm going to turn some heads. I did that with Metallica. I'm sure I'll do it with Slayer. It baffles me. It absolutely baffles me that people don't think this is the worst Slayer record. In fact, I sometimes frequent the Slayer subreddit, and people, when they rank, like tier rank, letter rank, Slayer records, they sometimes put this record in A. I don't know what the hell they are on, but I am sorry. Repentless is not a good Slayer record. In fact, in many ways, I don't even see it as a Slayer record. It just doesn't really do anything for me. And it kind of makes sense. I kind of understand why this record is kind of not really that good, in my opinion. Jeff died. Again, sadly, Jeff passed away, who was one of the guitar players of Slayer, and Dave was no longer with the band. Dave left. So you have 2 of the 4 founding members of Slayer, Kerry and Tom, and I really believe this is all Kerry's doing. Kerry was like, hey man, we should make another Slayer record, even though one of our core members is dead, and the other core member is probably never going to come back. Let's keep making music as Slayer. And it's sort of like the Beatles and Led Zeppelin, for me at least, which is if you don't have the core 4, you're not really Slayer. We're going to get to that era of Paul Bostaff Slayer, where Dave left and Paul took over, which I have issue with those records, which you'll kind of see that play out in the ranking, but this is really taking it too far. Nothing against Gary Holt. Gary Holt is a great guitar player. He definitely has skill, but it's not Slayer to me. In fact, a lot of this just feels so rehash. It feels so bottom barrel, just so whatever. The only song I really like on here is Repentless. I think it's got a really cool riff. Other than that, there's really nothing here for me. I kind of like Implode. Implode's kind of cool. When the Stillness Comes is fine. But some of the stuff on here is like garbage level Slayer. In fact, it has my least favorite Slayer song of all time, Vices. The moment Tom Araya said on recording, violence is the ultimate drug, let's get high. When he said that, those lyrics, and said them with panache and force and like, oh, this is great, this is awesome, this is a great lyric, I knew Slayer had to retire. It was in that moment Slayer needed to stop making music, is when he thought and they thought that was a lyric that could make it to the final recording. It's so, and not all Slayer lyrics are like really that great. I mean, they have great stuff in my opinion, but some Slayer lyrics are kind of stupid. I mean, did a 5th grader write that lyric? Violence is the ultimate drug, let's get high. Like, did you think that was a good lyric? Especially for your chorus? Just stupid. Stupid as hell. I want to hear any Slayer fan argue for that lyric and why it should be on here, or why Vices is a good song, or why this album is really any good. Because in my view, it's not. It's not good. It's kind of, at moments, embarrassing. And it makes total sense that right after they released this, they did a farewell tour and retired. Because if this is the continuation of Slayer, I'm glad they're no longer making music. And you know, it's kind of a Metallica situation where they have a legacy, they have a discography that I will get to that is phenomenal. That is some of the best metal of all time, in my opinion. But this ain't it, dude. And honestly, I'm glad they retired after making Repentless, because I don't want any more music if it's going to be sounding like Repentless. But yeah, I just don't really understand how people like that record. It just doesn't quite make sense to me. I also don't. I mean, I also understand why people don't like this record, Diablos and Musica. A lot of people, this is their least favorite Slayer record, and again, I understand why. It's not. It's not that great. But at least it's more Slayer than Repentless. And honestly, there's no moments on this record where I'm just like rolling my eyes or saying, "Why did they record that?" A lot of this is just kind of. It's kind of autopilot to me. It kind of just breezes by. A lot of these songs I don't really even remember. Like just thinking about it, it doesn't quite come to me. However, the opening track of this thing, Bitter Peace, that song goes, my dude. That song's amazing. In fact, it's so good. I love Bitter Peace. It's so good that that song alone brings it above Repentless. It could be that one song on this album, and this album's better than Repentless. That's how good Bitter Peace is. Amazing track. Much better than anything on Repentless, like miles better. Scrum is also on here. I like Scrum a lot, but it's not great. It's not a very good record. It's definitely a moment in the career of Slayer where it's kind of just, like I said, autopilot. Luckily, they came after this record with a very good one, which we'll get to. But when people rank this as the lowest, I get it. I see why. For me, it's not quite there. It's not quite Repentless bad, but it's also not very good either. So we'll just move past that. Next for me, in terms of ranking, is Christ Illusion. I have the vinyl cover that I think is even more provocative than the original album art. Just this image is pretty haunting and definitely gives the notion of what this album is. I mean, it's called Christ Illusion, so you pretty much get a sense, but the return of Dave Lombardo after an extended hiatus with the band, and quite a return. From here on out, I think these albums are good to, again, some of the best stuff ever written, in my opinion. But I think this album's good. Is it great? Not really. But there's great tracks on here, though. Flesh Storm is an insane opener. Such a good opener. Jihad. Just one of the first Slayer songs I really listened to a lot. I was in high school when I heard that song, and this was before I really liked Slayer. Jihad, like, oh my dear God. Just the content of that song and the way it's approached. I love Black Serenade. Cult is really cool, but there are some songs on here that I'm not really fond of. Catatonic, a little too drummy, or not Dave Lombardo drummy, but like a little too dull drum, a little too boring, a little too slow for Slayer. Eyes of the Insane. I'm not really sure why this song won the Grammy for Metal Performance of the Year or whatever it was. This is honestly one of the weakest songs on here. Flesh Storm, Jihad, Cult, Black Serenade, those songs are much better, in my opinion, than Eyes of the Insane. Not that Eyes of the Insane is terrible, but like, why is that the choice for the Grammys? Why'd they go with that one of all the ones they could have gone with? It's a good record. It's not a great record. And really, it's not. None of these songs are really, except Jihad. I think Jihad is iconic. But none of these songs really hit peak iconic Slayer for me, which for the next couple albums, there's at least one, if not more, that are like top tier iconic Slayer songs. So for me, Christ Illusion falls towards the bottom of the Slayer tier list. Now, this one's going to upset people, but I'm sorry. God Hates Us All is pretty low on my list. Now, does that make it bad? Of course not, right? In fact, when I talk about iconic Slayer songs, especially post-2000s Slayer, or rather post-90s Slayer, doesn't really get more iconic than Disciple. Disciple, I mean, one, it's amazing, but two, it's one of those Slayer songs that is just synonymous with Slayer. It just hits that peak. It's not, it's not as good as Master of Puppets, but it's sort of that vein of like, when you think Slayer, one of the first songs I'm sure comes to mind comes Disciple. But that's the thing. That's not even my favorite song on this thing. Have you heard Exile? Exile might be my favorite Slayer track post 90s. From 2000s on, Exile is insane. Such a good Slayer song. And it feels like Seasons. It feels like Rain and Blood era Slayer. Like, it's just, God, it's so good. I love every second of that song. Other songs I really like on here. Cast Down, I like. Deviants, Warzone, Payback's a lot of fun. But it's one of those things also where it's not quite that level of Slayer that I'm really looking for with Slayer. There's some songs on here. Threshold, Seven Faces, I mean, God Send Death, that they're fine. They're not awful, but it's not quite the level of Slayer I want. Um, but yeah, it's still good stuff. And you can't really argue against Disciple and Exile. Those songs are just so good. Um, and it's another moment of like those two songs are so good that everything below it so far in terms of the ranking, those two songs kind of elevate it to the point that it's at. So again, a lot of people, Hates Us All is one of their favorites. They rank it in like S and A. For me, it's probably like at highest is probably B. I would never put God Hates Us All in like A or higher. But I do like it a lot. It's not to say I dislike it. But then I'll say this next record I like more, and Slayer fans will scoff and guffaw at me, but I really like World Painted Blood. Now, it's got its dumb moments. For example, American. Not really a fan of that song. What else? Playing with Dolls is whatever. It's kind of But again, there's some songs on here that just go so hard. Unit 731, that is such an underrated Slayer track. I don't know why more people don't talk about this song. Unit 731 goes so hard, so fast, and that sort of drum thing that Dave does in the chorus where it's like, if you know the song, you know what I'm talking about. Every time that moment happens, I just grin ear to ear. It's such a cool, like, little touch that Dave Lombardo gives to the track. And Psychopathy Red. You want to talk? Some people say this is their attempt to try Rain and Blood again. I'm not really sure about that. But Psychopathy Red and Unit 731 are moments where I'm like, this feels like Rain and Blood. And it feels like good Rain and Blood. Like they're actually achieving it. Other songs, I like Snuff. Hate Worldwide. At times I like it. At times I don't like it. But I think I like it more than I dislike it. Not of This God, I think, is a great closer. Another underrated Slayer track that doesn't really get talked about a lot. But for the most part, what really elevates this record for me is Unit 731 and Psychopathy Red, and especially Psychopathy Red. Psychopathy Red, yeah, I just said that Exile is probably my favorite post, or rather 2000s on era Slayer track, but Psychopathy Red might be it too. I don't know. If I'd have to do like Exile for Psychopathy Red, I'd have to think about it for a while. But in the moment, I think the majority of this record I like more than God Hates Us All. Just by slightly, though. It's not a huge leap. So you'll notice there's a lot of second era, or rather second half of their career Slayer here. And that will continue. Much like Metallica, I think their first 5 records are just their best records, personally. So we're at 6. And since there's only one record left that is not the first 5, you can probably guess that would be Divine Intervention. Before I talk about the music on Divine Intervention, can I just say that this album cover is one of my favorites of all time? It might be my favorite Slayer album cover. The one at number 1 is also very, very good. It might be my favorite. But the one that I really think is just like evocative and cool and different is this one here, which of course is Divine Intervention. A really cool record and a really cool image, which I'm pretty sure it's a painting, but it's painted so well that it kind of just looks like a photograph of some crazy ritualistic emblem. I love it. I think it's really cool. And it's one of those things where Cody and I sometimes talk about, if you're in the record store and you're flipping through records, you want that album cover, like just thing that grips you. If I was flipping through records and I didn't know Slayer and I saw this thing, I would stop and be like, what is this? Now, as far as the music is concerned, the only thing I'll say about this that kind of brings it down is the production. It's not great. There's a lot of moments where the production is really odd. If you know your Slayer history, you know that they had a lot of issues with the production with this record and the studio space of this record. But some of these songs, man, are just so killer. Sex Murder Art, Ditto Head, Room 2, I'm blanking. And what the funny thing is that, you know, I'm enough of a Slayer fan to know like pretty much a lot of these songs. 213, not Room 213, but 213 is what I'm looking for. Mind Control is again, another closing track that is not really talked about. I love Mind Control. Very underrated Slayer song. It's just the sound of it. And this is the first record where Paul Bostaff comes in because Dave had to leave the band, as it were, because he had issues with the band. And Paul Bostaff comes in, and Paul Bostaff is a very good drummer. He's not Dave Lombardo, but he is very good. And so he carries his weight on this record. And there's moments where it feels like Slayer it feels like Dave Lombardo's Slayer, where Slayer hasn't missed a beat. Mind Control comes to mind. Sex Murder Art, Ditto Head. Like I said, Ditto Head is such a killer track. And it's funny when people, there's sort of that moment where some people I know, including partner, parents, etc., they don't like really fast, aggressive music. And then I put on something like Ditto Head, and they're like, yeah, this is why I don't like this. And I'm like, well, this is why I love it. This is, Ditto Head's a great example of why I love Slayer and fast metal music, heavy sounding metal music. It's great. It's awesome. It's not quite the first 5, though. So we have gotten to the first 5 Slayer records. Now, the question is, how do they fall in terms of the ranking? If you watched you didn't watch. If you listen to our South of Heaven versus Seasons in the Abyss album Fight Club, you'll know where the placement of 2 of these records are, or at least I think I've covered that. But for the others, you'll sort of have to weigh in on where they fall. So for me, number 5 is their first album, Show No Mercy. Very, very, very great start. Now, is it as good as Kill 'Em All or as iconic as Kill 'Em All? Let me start with iconic as Kill 'Em All. No, obviously it's not as iconic as Kill 'Em All. Kill 'Em All sort of set the scene on fire. Show No Mercy kind of came in right after that scene got set on fire. Is it as good as Kill 'Em All? I'm not quite sure if it's as good, but I'm going to tell you, there's some songs on here that are just as good as Kill 'Em All songs, if not better. The ideal one, or the key one, you probably know is, of course, Black Magic. Black Magic is such a killer Slayer track. Iconic level Slayer song. The Antichrist. Probably the catchiest Slayer song ever, which is hard to say because Slayer really didn't make a lot of catchy songs. The Antichrist that could be a radio single, honestly. And some people's issue with this record is that it doesn't quite feel Slayer. When you get to the next album and on, that's when Slayer really takes shape, really takes form. This record doesn't quite feel that way, and I can see that. But that's nothing aside from what I love about this record, which is some of the songs are like killer. This is also a Metal Blade pressing, a repressing, so I just wanted to show off that this is a split vinyl. It's black and red. I'm going to change it a little bit. Again, love this kind of thing, where it's split. And when it's on the turntable and it's spinning, it just looks cooler than just a black vinyl on the turntable. I wish more record pressings would do this. I wish they'd be more interested in this. A lot of them do. Some of them don't. But Metal Blade was cool enough to do that. But yeah, anyway. Die by the Sword. Awesome song. Metal Storm Face the Slayer. Iconic. Show No Mercy. Again, another underrated Slayer closing track. A lot of Slayer's closing tracks are very underrated. There's some that are extremely rated, as they should be, but a lot of them are, kind of pushed to the side, pushed to the opposition. I don't really see why. Not enough people talk about Show No Mercy, the song. And as a total collective, I can see how this is very Nawabum influenced, and it's not quite the Slayer we know. That doesn't make it bad, though. In fact, it makes it good in a lot of respects. Even though it's not quite Slayer, I still love it. I still put this on time to time just because I kind of want to be thrown back to Slayer in their inception and Slayer really going for what they were attempting to do with their first record, which is very cool. Now, again, this is the whole album Fight Club thing. And this is where blasphemy commences for a lot of people. But South of Heaven is my number 4, meaning that there's 3 other records that are above South of Heaven. For some people, this is their number 1. For some people, this is Slayer at their best. I don't quite see that. Now, is this Slayer at their really, really, really good? Yeah, this is Slayer at their amazing. This is Slayer at full form at a lot of moments. But it's also Slayer at moments where I'm not really a huge fan. And again, I won't rehash this a lot because Album Fight Club talked about this a lot. But for example, there's some songs on here I'm just not a huge fan of. And the peak one that I get shit for all the time is I'm not a huge fan of Mandatory Suicide. I think it's got a great riff. I think it's got a great groove. But I think Tom's performance on it is a little odd, especially in that chorus when he starts like echoing and going, suicide, suicide. Like, why? Why was that the choice? It's just not quite there. Read Between the Lies. Kind of whatever, kind of forgettable. And I went off about Dissident Aggressor on the Album Fight Club episode. So again, I will not go off here. All I'll say is I don't really get why they put Dissident Aggressor on here. I think it's a really good cover of the Judas Priest song, but I don't understand why it's here. Why is it on their studio album? It doesn't need to be. It shouldn't be. And they could have easily went for something better than Dissident Aggressor, in my opinion. But that should not take away from the amazing moments on this. South of Heaven, Silent Scream, Behind the Crooked Cross, Live Undead, Ghosts of War, killer songs, amazing songs, stuff that is some of their best material, but not quite the peak of their best material and not quite a full album that I want it to be. It's got a lot of amazing moments, but it's got a lot of other moments where it's not quite what I want it to be. So there's that. I'm actually going to take a pause in the action here because my dog is chewing on something that she should not. So please excuse me for one moment. Sorry about that. The audio version will have that cut out for sure. But for now, in the video, we're doing this off the cuff. We're doing it live. So there you go. Number 3 is Hell Awaits. Now, again, this might be blasphemy to some people, but for me, Hell Awaits just kind of accomplishes a lot. It's got a very strange how this one is like a lot of wrinkles, but I'm going to actually take it out of its sleeve because that's going to look better on camera. So Hell Awaits, and it's a Metal Blade record pressing, so it's got a really cool vinyl in my opinion, which is this, I think it's, this is the orange and black like tiger splatter. Very cool. Looks very cool on the turntable. Again, glad they do this. I think it's just cooler than black wax. But Hell Awaits, it's got the production issue of it sounds like it was produced in a trash can. And on sub albums, that can ruin an album for me. If it's produced poorly, then I don't really care for it. But man, there is something about the production on Hell Awaits that just sets the mood, right? It's called Hell Awaits. The song Hell Awaits sounds like you're literally being freight lifted down into hell, like you're slowly descending into hell. And the production plays into that as well. The production makes it feel like you're descending in hell and you're spending the next 40 whatever minutes in hell. And that's why it sounds the way it sounds. So where in most cases the production can ruin, or bad production can ruin the record, I think on Hell Awaits it actually makes it cooler. It sets a really cool vibe. And this is a moment too where from here on out, there's only 3 records left. Not a bad track on any of them in my opinion. And that includes Hell Awaits. Now there's some that are better than others. Yeah. Hardening of the Arteries, I think is kind of the weakest track here. It's a cool closer though. I don't hate it. In fact, I wouldn't remove it. I like it a lot, but it's not quite the level of, for example, Kill Again. Love Kill Again. Hell Awaits, the opening track. Amazing. Do I need to say anything more? One of my favorite Slayer songs of all time, At Dawn They Sleep, which again, amazing title, amazing just like track. Really kind of feels like a prog epic in some moments, but love what it's doing. Love everything about it. Praise of Death, Necrophiliac, Crypts of Eternity, all this stuff is great, right? If you're a Slayer fan, you know it's great. But if you're not a Slayer fan, this is the kind of thing where when people say that Slayer's satanic, of course they're not satanic, but you listen to Hell Awaits and you kind of believe it because, man, does this sound like hell. It sounds literally hellish. It sounds like it has been touched by Satan. And I'm sorry, that's kind of, it sounds cool. That's kind of cool in my opinion, where a lot of people would turn away. For me, it scratches an itch that my brain needs in terms of music, which is it's fast, it's heavy, it's dark, and I love it. And I think this is where Slayer really becomes Slayer as opposed to Show No Mercy, where they're just this band that likes to play fast and kind of heavy music. Here is where Slayer comes into fruition. This is where Slayer is born. And from here, they get even better, which includes my number 2 album. Some people's number 1. It's a funny thing with Slayer. There's a lot of variance in terms of what people think the best Slayer track or Slayer album is. But this one tends to be in the conversation a lot, which is Seasons in the Abyss. Now I'm just going to go off about the red border on the album cover, which I think is just so stupid. Whose idea was that? This would be so much better if the red border wasn't there, right? Because I love this image. This image is really cool. This red border, so stupid. It's so dumb. Why do they choose to do that? But that's beside the point. Do not let the red border affect the music that is on this thing. Every single track on here is amazing. I'm sorry, Cody. Every song on here is phenomenal. It's a better album, in my opinion, than South of Heaven. And of course, everything that has come before this moment. But for me, I mean, again, we spent a whole episode talking about these songs and the songs in South of Heaven. So if you haven't listened to that episode, please go do so. I'll just rehash here what I think makes this great. And what makes this great: War Ensemble, Blood Red, Spirit in Black, Expandable Youth, Dead Skin Mask, Hallowed Point, Skeleton Society, Temptation, Born of Fire, and Season in the Abyss. That's what makes this great, is that every single song I just named is awesome. There's not a bad one on here. Even Temptation, which is like The most paint by numbers song, in my opinion, still a killer track. And that breakdown in Temptation is sick. Every time I hear it, I'm, again, grinning ear to ear. It makes me happy. And that's not to say the tracks that are obviously iconic on here. War Ensemble, Dead Skin Mask. Probably my favorite slow Slayer song would be that one. Skeletons of Society, Seasons in the Abyss, the closer. I mean, it's Seasons in the Abyss. But even the lesser known ones, and for me, Spirits in Black, which I said on the episode, and I'll say again, I think is severely underrated. Probably my favorite Slayer song ever. It's just so good, and it's not talked about enough. It's literally top 3 Slayer songs, if not number 1. For me, it is number 1, but it's not nearly discussed enough, and I think it should be, because this record is just so killer. Not a bad thing about it, not a bad moment about it. I love every second of it. And so that makes you wonder, why is it not number 1? Well, if you know, and if you've been keeping up, you know what number 1 is. And the reason it's number 1 is because, bold claim here, I think it's the greatest metal record of all time. I'm actually going to take it out of the sleeve because it deserves it. This is, of course, Rain and Blood. I really have a lot to say about Rain and Blood, and we're already at the 30-minute mark, so I'm going to keep it kind of brief. But this is, in my opinion, the greatest achievement in metal music, which, you know, that exists in a world where Paranoid exists, where a lot of metal bands exist, where Master of Puppets exists, where Rust in Peace exists. But for me, at the top of the mountain, there is and will always be Rain and Blood. It is 29 minutes long. It is not long at all. And yet what they accomplish in 29 minutes kind of boggles my mind. It still blows me away to this day, even though I've heard this thing thousands, maybe not thousands, hundreds of times. It just... I mean, I said Seasons in the Abyss is perfection, and it is. I wouldn't change a second of it, but Seasons in the Abyss is also running like 40 to 50 minutes in length. It's double the length of this thing. But what this thing accomplishes in just about 30 minutes is just unfathomable. It's a miracle. It really is. I mean, I'm trying to sort of compose my thoughts in terms of people who don't know this record. If you know this record, then this is not surprising whatsoever. The fact that somebody's saying this is one of the greatest things in metal music is not surprising. Collectively, a lot of metal people can agree, metal artists, metal fans can agree that this is the best thrash metal record of all time. And it is. I think there's really no argument to be said. Is it the greatest metal record of all time? Of course, there's argument there, and a lot of people would not agree. But for me, it just... From the first time I heard it, and I really heard it, which was college, the first time I really heard it and really understood it and didn't, you know, obviously I heard Raining Blood before, I heard Angel of Death before, but they were removed from the album. In hearing the whole thing for the first time, front to back, something in me changed. Something chemically in me switched. And there was this moment where, like, there's everything, there's my existence before Rain and Blood, and there's my existence after listening to Rain and Blood. And that's a very heavy thing to say. It's a very sort of monumental thing to say, but it's true. It's just, after I heard this, music kind of changed, in my opinion. It was a moment where, like, after hearing this, Metallica just doesn't quite do it like this does. And Master of Puppets is still one of my favorite records of all time, but it's not Rain and Blood. There's just something about this thing. And it's not Hell Awaits, where Hell Awaits feels like it's touched by, you know, hellish intent. Hell Awaits is hellish. This is psychotic. This is sadistic. It feels like a serial killer going on a rampage. And that sounds terrible to say, right? You hear that definition and you go, oh my God. It's why, you know, people clutch their pearls and say, this is satanic music. This is ruining the youth. It's, you know, being toxic to the minds of people of, I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. What I'm trying to say is, it's provocative, it's dark, it's scary at moments, it's very horrific in moments, and I love everything about it. I love the performances. I love the songs. I love the way the songs are structured. I don't think there's a single song on here that is out of place. I love that Angel of Death is first. I love that Piece by Piece is second. I love that Necrophobic is third, and so on and so forth, right? I love that post-mortem goes into Raining Blood. I love that Raining Blood is the end, and it ends with that thunderstorm. It just feels so epic. It feels so beyond music. It's a moment where literally it doesn't feel like music anymore. It feels like an experience. It feels like something you're experiencing in your life. And yeah, it is. It is music. It's on record. It's on this thing that if you press stop, the music stops. But it also feels like it's this spirit. It's this entity that exists outside of you, and it's influencing you and it's corrupting you. And my God, it's so good. This is without a doubt my favorite Slayer record. It's not even close. Like I think Seasons is a 10 out of 10. This is an 11 out of 10. And I never do that. I never give anything an 11 out of 10 because I think it's kind of stupid. But honestly, this is that. This is the definition of an 11 out of 10 record for me. It's just perfect. It's not only my favorite metal record, it's like one of my 5 favorite metal record, or one of my 5 favorite records of all time. Any genre of music, top 5 for me, this is up there. Now, is it number 1? I don't know. That changes by the day. But on some days, yeah, it is. It's something I never get tired of. The second it ends, I just want to go right back to the beginning and start over again. It truly is an achievement, a true achievement of human creativity. And yeah, it is dark, and yeah, it is scary, and people turn away from it. But man, if you can get past that, if you can break the mold and get over the hump, in my opinion, there's really nothing better than Rain and Blood. And yeah, it's my favorite Slayer record. And I love that I have it on vinyl. It's one of my prized possessions right here. Even though this is one of the easier ones you can get on vinyl. But yeah, I kind of just went off there about Rain and Blood, but I feel very strongly about Rain and Blood. I do truly believe it is one of the greatest things ever composed in terms of music. So that's how I feel about it. That's how I feel about Slayer. I won't rehash anymore just because we're hitting the 36-minute mark here, but thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you were watching, there will be more sidebars to come and, of course, more album fight clubs to come. So thanks for listening. Thanks for joining. That's what I feel about Slayer, one of my favorite bands of all time. So now you know. Now you know how I feel about all of them. And guess I'll see you on the next one. Take care.